Do you want me to do it instead?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Ask yourself this question. Why might this be embarrassing for Christians?
Because, if anything, Jesus should be baptized in John.
Yeah, being baptized by somebody kind of implies that you're subordinated to them, right? For some Christians, like, whoa, wait. John baptized Jesus? Shouldn't it be Jesus who's baptizing John instead of the other way around? Right? Because baptism kind of implies a position of authority. That implies that John had authority over Jesus, and that's why he could baptize Jesus. It might have been embarrassing for instance, the author of Matthew. If you're the author of Matthew and you've got the Gospel of Mark in front of you, and you're like, how can I change this so it's not embarrassing? What might you say? Well, let's look. Can I have a volunteer who read Matthew 3:13 and forward? Kristen?
Then Jesus came from Galilee to John in Jordan to be baptized by him. John would have prevented him, saying, I need to be baptized by you, and do you come to me? But Jesus answered him, Let it be so now, for it is proper for us in this way to fulfill all righteousness. Then he consented. And when Jesus had been baptized, just as he came up from the water, suddenly the heavens were opened.
Okay. How is this one different?
John basically says, like, that's not right, but then Jesus says it's okay.
Yeah. John's like, well, I don't, like, you're superior to me. I don't know how I could baptize you. And Jesus says, well, I give you permission. It's okay. Mark is different from Matthew because Matthew is different from Mark because Matthew adds this explanation as to why it was that John would be permitted to baptize Jesus. This is an addition that makes sense if early Christians were embarrassed by the idea that Jesus was baptized by somebody else. Now, how about Luke? Somebody read Luke. Christine?
Sure. Now when all the people were baptized, and when Jesus also had been baptized and was praying.
Okay, who baptized Jesus here in Luke? It doesn't say. That leaves the problem aside. It doesn't say John baptized Jesus. Maybe we can resolve this by leaving it unstated who baptized Jesus. In addition, guess what? Right before that passage in Luke, turn back to page 13. We just read Luke 3:21. Can you, Kristen, read Luke 3:19 through 20 at the bottom there?
Sure. But Herod the ruler, who had been rebuked by him because of Herodias, his brother's wife, and because of all the evil things that Herod had done, added to that all by shutting up John in prison.
Okay, verse 20 says John was where? And verse 21 says when Jesus had been baptized. So according to Luke, where was John when Jesus was baptized? He was in prison. So could he have baptized Jesus? Right? If we're going to take this strictly in a chronological order, according to Luke, of course John didn't baptize Jesus. He was in prison at the time. Right? This is an example of what scholars do when they look at the synoptics. They don't just try to explain the similarities, but they also try to explain the differences. Why might Matthew and Luke have changed the story that was in Mark a little bit?
Like save face.
Yeah, to save face, to make it look like Jesus was not subordinated to someone else. Matthew explains it one way, Luke explains it another way, by leaving it vague who was baptized, or who baptized Jesus. Dang it. Is that clear how we get three different accounts of how and when Jesus was baptized? They all seem to originate from Mark, because that second stuff is almost identical, but they introduce it in completely different ways. We just look at one other passage here in 25. The Beatitudes. Most of you have probably heard of the Beatitudes before. The most famous version is in Matthew there. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. That's how it starts out. If you are a supporter of the four-source hypothesis, where's this material from? Right, it's Q, and why would you suspect it's from Q?
Not in Mark.
Right, because they share it, but it's not in Mark. But is it identical to each other? Luke's version is a whole lot shorter. How else is Luke's version a little bit different?